manifests in many, many problems. I would like to start by a bit of a critical look at the division of Al-Aqli and Naqli. When we say Al-Aqli and when we say Naqli, what do we mean by that? What do we mean by Naql? Naql, naqala yanqulu naqlan is a transferring of information, the inherited information or the heritage or the transferred information. But actually a Naqli is not one thing in Islam. We really need to differentiate between a Naqli that is wahi, that is a revelation, and a Naqli that is the human interpretation of the revelation and the human understanding and the fiqh of that revelation. In the Shari'ah studies, when we say a Naqli, we mean both. But both are very different. There is al-manqul bil-wahi, that is something that is transferred to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a revelation, and therefore it is ilm, it's a knowledge from Allah, it's a revealed knowledge, versus al-manqul bil-kutub, and something that, from the time of the Sahaba on, when Muslims interpreted al-naql, that is al-wahi, into their understanding. And these are two very different kinds of naqli. So when we deal with al-aqli and naqli, we need to differentiate in the naqli between kalamullah subhanahu wa ta'ala and kalam al-bashar. Because as you know, Shari'ah is different from fiqh. Shari'ah yashru'u shari'. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fatah yafqahu faqih. This is the human being. And I mean by fiqh here, not only the legal tradition, not only the qanun, but I mean by fiqh, every kind of understanding. يتفقهوا في الدين, not necessarily to become faqih, but to become people of understanding. And then aqli, when we say al-aqli, what do we mean by that? Because there are different kinds of aqli as well. There is the sciences, and some of them are natural sciences, experimental logic, mathematical logic, and so forth. And the others are social sciences, where the methodology, if you wish, is a bit more loose than the natural sciences, if I may. Since my brother mentioned I studied, different sciences. In the natural sciences, in the lab, the logic at the end is a mathematical logic, and the mathematical logic is quite certain when it comes to the Greek thinking in terms of qat'i and dhanni, certain and uncertain. When we talk about the natural sciences, we have kind of a definite, again, our perception between the premises and the results. And the proof, what we call proof in the philosophy of science, is something that is mathematically definite or mathematically confirmed. And then eventually we realized that what is mathematically confirmed is actually subject to change. For centuries we went with the Newtonian kind of worldview that has to do with mechanics and all of that, and the equations that came out of that. And then eventually we realized that Newton was not definite. Newton was an approximation. And then we went into a relativity kind of worldview, where we are looking at the Newtonian logic in a more refined way. And we started to realize that the space and time are actually a function of each other, and the four dimensions and all that, that's a very different world. So we realized that the logic that we used with the Newtonian world is not definite and is not certain, and is actually an approximation. So we started to correct this epsilon, for those with the science background here, the epsilon of Einstein, tried to start to correct the mistakes of the Newtonian logic. And then even in the 20th century, before the end of it, we started to have the quantum physics and the quantum logic. That is a very different story, even from the Einsteinian kind of world, where if Einstein is giving us equations for communication that cannot be beyond the speed of light, now with quantum physics we know that particles communicate beyond the speed of light, because there is another higher level of integration between these particles, We know that matter itself alternates between matter and energy and so forth, and our certainty about the science and the logic that we inherited from even the Einsteinian equations are also fading away, because we are realizing that Einstein is also an approximation. And quantum physics is now telling us that the reality is a dual reality between energy and matter, and we are now facing some dilemmas in terms of science that are major dilemmas. We don't know how to solve them. So when we say Aqli and we talk about natural sciences, we are not really talking about certainty. We are talking about an approximation, but it's based on mathematical logic, and therefore there is a degree of certainty in that approximation. On the other hand, when we say Aqli and we mean social sciences, these are also sciences that are based on investigation, on studying of phenomena, and proposing a tafsir, an interpretation, an understanding of that phenomena based on some proposal. And then the researcher would go to the ground and observe, or do these questionnaires or interviews or interact with the ground and come up with a theory that has to do with the society, sociology, the politics part of the world, in the psychology, and so forth. And these sciences, when we deal with the reality, also there is no certainty, there is an approximation, but there is a methodology that is quite rigorous, that any of our students or professors would know that you have to explain in your research when you do social sciences studies. And therefore that Aqli is also is not fixed. And the Naqli, what is fixed, is al-Wahi. But the interpretation is also not fixed. There is another side of Aqli that has to do with al-Wahi. Is our understanding of the Quran specifically, and the Sunnah of Muhammad ﷺ as a bayan of the Quran, as an illustration of the Quran. So when we deal with the Quran in terms of our aql, our mind, we are actually trying to understand the basic concepts of the Quran, what the Quran teaches us about life, how the Quran is shaping our mind in order to look at the world in a certain way. What does life mean? What does this world and the afterworld mean? What does death do to us? And what are the sunan Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create the world? And how injustice will bring destruction? And how the power is an alternation between people. وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. For example, power is alternated between people. In order to understand that, this is an Aqli exercise. This is something that we need to think about, but based on the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us. I'm starting with this in order to, if you wish, give some analysis of al-Aqli and the Naqli, and that they are not really two rigid blocks as we like to look at them, and that al-ulum al-Naqliya, other than al-Wahi, is not certain, is a matter of interpretation and a matter of looking, a matter of fiqh. And al-ulum al-aqliya as well are not certain and are not definite. And yes, they are great theories that could be even based on some mathematical logic, but they are also not set in stone, and they are subject to our critique, and especially when it comes to the social sciences, because the Quran is giving us a lot about politics and economics and law and all of that in a way that I will describe when we talk about the integration based on Maqasid Shari'ah. Next, I would like to survey with you a number of approaches for the integration of al-Aqli or Naqli that I see in the current literature. And I think that these approaches deserve our attention and our critique, all of them, including the approach that I will propose based on Maqasid Shari'ah. The first approach rejects al-Aqli and confirms al-Naqli. It's an extremist approach. We usually call it a literalist approach, al-Madrasa al-Harfiyya. But it's not really literalist, it is partialistic, another al-Juz'i. the partialistic, atomistic approach. Because every Muslim is literalist. We all, when we pray, we don't know why we raise our hand this way or why we fast in Ramadan. We are literalists. We take harfiyan, we take literally what Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam taught us. Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. So we pray like him. So we are literalists being Muslims. But we are not supposed to be partialistic. The partialistic school, which is the first school I surveyed here, is a school that focuses on al-Naqli and ignores al-Aqli and does not believe that al-Aqli has any truth behind it. Notable scholars in the 20th century, when the Americans went to the moon, some notable scholars, without mentioning names, rejected that. They said that no, they didn't go to the moon, this is just jinn playing with the mind, and that the earth is not round, and الرد على من قال بكروية الأرض. And these kinds of researches where people are totally rejecting al-Aqli, the book that was called The Rejection of Those Who Said That the Earth is Round, and this kind of thing. Because for them, al-Naqli is the only confirmed truth, and al-Aqli should be absolutely rejected. And al-Naqli for them includes the inherited fiqh and the inherited understanding, even the inherited science. So when these people talk about medicine, they still talk about Galenos, and they still, quote Ibn Rushd, Averroes, and so forth, even old medicine, when they speak about medicine, and they reject the new medicine, that all of these are bid'ah and all of that. That is one extreme. We have another extreme in our ummah, which is the other extreme that agrees to everything that al-Aqli brings and rejects al-Naqli, absolutely. And they call al-Naqli history, in the sense that including even al-Wahy, they do what is called in postmodern philosophy historicization, or putting the whole Wahy and the whole Naqli in a historical context. And they say that all of this are cultural products, all what we inherited from our Naqli, including the Wahy, is just a culture, is the expression of the Arabs of the time, and they deconstruct, to use a postmodern term, the reality and the authority of the Naqli. That is the other extreme, and you can see that both extremes are not Islamic, really. They don't serve our ummah, they don't really represent what the Quran is telling us. The Quran is not asking us to reject our mind and reject our experiment. And we go to the moon and we look at the earth and it is round, and we still have a fatwa that is not round. That is, against the Islamic logic and the Islamic mind. And also, the Quran is revealed as an authority and as a sultan. In Arabic they call it sultatul nas. There is a sultan, there is an authority in the Quran. Yes, we could critique the interpretation of the Quran, but we cannot critique the Quran itself. We could critique the different fuqaha who understood the Sunnah in a certain way, but we cannot critique Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, because he is ma'soom, he is involved, he is protected from error, and so forth. So you can see that both extremes do not really serve what we are trying to do here in the integration of Aqli or Naqli for the sake of this ummah. There is a number of solutions in the middle between al-Aqli or Naqli, and I will, inshallah, survey a few. One of them says that we take from al-Aqli al-ala, ulum al-ala. Typical to this is Imam al-Ghazali, for example, in his As-Suffah and others. And when he talks about al-mantiq, or the logic, as ulum al-ala, as the sciences of the machines, or the material, the technology, if you wish. And this group takes the technology from al-ulum al-aqliyah, from the rational sciences, if you wish, but they reject anything other than the technology. They take the machines. So, fine, we are going to take from these sciences the cars and the computers and the lights and the buildings and so forth, but we are not going to take anything that has to do with social sciences. We are not going to agree with any political theory. We reject everything from democracy to reasoning and so forth. So this is also one of our Muslim thinking schools, where al-aqli for them is only a machine, al-ala, ulum al-ala. And the problem with this is that ulum al-ala are not void of value. Every machine has a value behind it, and every technology is not value free. So when we say I'm going to take medicine in terms of technology only, because medicine, those Westerners, yes, they're kuffar, we're going to reject all their theories, but we're going to take their machines. But when you take a medical machine, let's say for one example, that has to do with transplantation, this is not value free. This has a certain philosophy. It looks at the human being as something that is replaceable. You can take one thing from here and put it there and so forth. It is not value free. If you take an institution like a bank and say that I'm not going to deal with riba, but I'm going to take the bank in. The bank is not value free. The bank has a philosophy behind it and an assumption of the organization of the society and so forth. And it's not something that you can just borrow, as Imam al-Ghazali borrowed the logic from the Greeks. And he said, I'm not going to take their philosophy, but I will take their logic. But by him taking the logic, I wrote about that in some detail in some book on Usul al-Fiqh. When he took the logic, he actually fell into a lot of problems with his Usuli methodology. Because their logic, for one example, was binary. Was al-qat'i wal-dhamni, and al-'am wal-khas, wal-mutlaq wal-muqayyad. And this put a lot of restrictions on his thinking when he started to deal with usul, because he took a certain logic that is not value free. It's a logic that is based on certain dichotomies and certain trees, categories, if you wish. And if you read back in the Greeks' philosophy, these categories are not value free. So people who are saying that we're going to adopt a Naqli and we're going to take from Aqli only the technology and the machines and the institutions, they are wrong. Because the institutions and the machines, a car, a computer, are not value free. They come with an assumption for the nature of human beings, for the nature of society, and for the dealings and the economics and so forth that are not value free. Another school in the middle is a school that takes al-Naqli and al-Aqli, but tries to do what I call in my writings apologetic approach, apologizing for what al-Aqli had reached. So basically, when they study political science, they study from the usual American textbook. But then they try to apologize. They say, well, yes, Islam is a democracy from day one. And the scroll of Medina was a constitution from day one. And we had the separation of powers from day one. And we had the state as it is defined today, actually from day one. And so forth. When they study economics, they say, well, yes, we had the same economical system from day one. And actually the stock markets, yeah, we have something similar to that in our civilization. And the institutions that deal with the financial issues, yes. And then we try to apologize for the status quo, especially in the social sciences, based on history that is different from what we are apologizing for. Because yes, the Quran is full of human rights, but the whole system of human rights that we have today, we have to look at it in a critical way. We cannot take it as it is, and we say that yes, we were about human rights from day one. And then when you look at, for example, the Islamic Declaration of Human Rights, you find it a copy of the UN Charter of Human Rights, but with ayat and hadith, and just to add to the same charter. And you see it in even some political programs. I was asked to comment in 2012 on the program that the Muslim Brotherhood had taken for the elections in Egypt. And one of the brothers in Egypt, I was visiting Egypt at the time, one of the brothers from that committee wrote a program for me in one of my lectures there in Egypt. And he said, we want you to comment on this from a Maqasid perspective. So I opened the program, and there was like a full program for the economy, especially, the page had some ayat and ahadith. I said, why do you need an Islamic view? You obviously did your Islamic research. They said, no. We asked some professors to write the program based on their experience with the status quo, like just simply by copying what is there before 2011 and the changes that happened. And then after we finished the program, we decided to add on every page one ayah and one hadith. I told them, but you should think about the ayah and the hadith before the program, not after the program. Because now the program, I see, if you look at the economic side, I told him this is very conservative. This is even neo-conservative. You have a country where there's a lot of poverty and a lot of problems, but you are actually putting more money in the bringing of those business people and giving them tax reliefs, and you are going totally to the right when it comes to the economic side. And it's not only even the Americans came to Egypt. I read in the news that they said that the program that they saw from the new parliament was more right, more to the right than Mubarak's economic policy at that time. So you can see that an Islamic approach is apologizing for a very right-wing, neo-conservative approach to the economy. And then after they come up with the program, they put one ayah and one hadith to decorate the program. That is the apologetic approach that is not coming originally from the ayah and the hadith. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want from us when we govern an economy of a nation? And what should we start with? And what are our priorities? Versus apologizing for the status quo and trying to beautify the status quo with an ayah or a hadith. And we do a lot of this, especially with some Islamic transactions, where we copy a very much the same system, but then we apologize for the system. And we don't try to be critical. Can we copy from others? Yes, of course. And we should benefit from what others had developed. The Islamic civilization benefited the world and developed. And Europe copied a lot, as you can read in history from Baghdad and from Andalusia. They were not going to be able to initiate the Renaissance and go on with it without what they copied from Baghdad and Andalusia and so forth of the time. And if we are going to initiate another Islamic Renaissance, we have to copy from what they produced, but we have to be selective and we have to be critical, as they were critical. And they took out what didn't suit them, what didn't suit their religions or their philosophies and so forth, and they took what benefited them in order to build their civilization in that round of civilization. So with our round, yes, we need to benefit from the institutions and the laws and the theories and al-ulum al-aqliyah, all the social and natural sciences that they develop, but we have to be critical, and we cannot be apologetic by copying something and then we become an inaccurate picture of a Western university or a Western city or a Western bank or a Western any of that. We need to copy that, but also be critical. Now, next, there is, finally before the Maqasid approach, there are a number of attempts that are trying to mix Al-Aqli or Naqli by bringing experts in what they call the text and what they call the context or the reality or the human sciences and put them in the same room for them to develop a mixed approach. And that approach, I had the honor of participating in one of those experiments when I was back in Doha. And my critique of that is that when you bring basically a group of fuqaha, people who are jurists, they don't represent everything about Islam. They represent the legal side of Islam. They represent the fiqh only. And the fiqh is not everything about Islam. Islam has a philosophy and history and tafsir and da'wah, and Islam has many other sciences, even in the traditional ulum Shari'ah. Where is the da'wah side? Why only your room, when you bring the scholars of the scripts, they are all fuqaha, That is one issue. The other issue is that when you bring the scholars of the reality or the scholars of the sciences, and they don't come from the Islamic background, they would be Muslim sometimes or non-Muslim, but people who are trained in a way that has nothing to do with the Islamic background. And that training makes them look at the world and the institutions and the sciences in a way that cross-talks with the other people. So some people have their eyes in history and they live the medicine, let's say a medicine seminar. They live in the medicine of 1,000 years ago, and they don't see how what they have to say is relevant to today's medical policy, let's say, versus people who come from the typical, let's say, Western medicine approach. And medicine for them is an industry that has certain, values attached to it, and they don't look at the human and they don't look at the society in the same way that the Quran is asking us to look. And the cross-talking is not producing, in my experience, is not producing an integration. It's producing a fragmented collection of approaches where there is an approach that is quoting from the books of fiqh and another approach that is quoting Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and you name it and Kant and Hegel from the Western philosophy. And therefore, you really cannot integrate if you are going to have a proceeding of a conference where some of the papers are analyzing Hegel and Nietzsche and the other papers are analyzing Abu Hanifa and Malik. And they are not really integrating, they are not dealing with the reality. Another problem with considering ulama al-Shari'ah to be only the fuqaha is that our fuqaha historically had been marginalized and had been taken out of the public interest and the public concern since the Khilafah became mulk, became a kingdom. Since the time when the Khilafah became an empire, the fuqaha had been not involved in the public affairs. And therefore, in one of those conferences, without mentioning names, one of the prominent fuqaha, he told me on the side of the seminar, why are you bringing me to discuss public health? I'm a faqih, I don't deal with public health. This is not my specialization. I cannot tell you anything about that. I told him, but we need an Islamic approach to public health. Whom should we ask when we look at public health? He said, ask the government. The government will decide the policies for public health. And what they decide is for me to follow, because I am a good citizen, I follow the government. I said, yes, but the government needs knowledge in order to decide about the public health. And we need an Islamic knowledge, an Islamic approach. He said, no, that's not our job as fuqaha. You come and tell me the doctor should touch that woman or not, and I give you a rukhsa, or I don't give you, I am studying this. I am studying the fatwa that has to do with the behaviors of the doctor, not with the public health. The public health is an issue that I am not specialized in. So that is finally the other attempt that I think, and it's also very similar to the Islamization of knowledge school, in which it is recommended to study Western sciences to perfection and Islamic sciences to perfection, so that people in the same seminar would bring an outcome. My experience with this is that people crosstalk and people don't have one reference. What is this one reference? Briefly, it is actually a Maqasid al-Shari'ah approach to the Quran, not to the history of Maqasid al-Shari'ah in fiqh or usul. And that is a bit of a specialized topic. Inshallah, in a few minutes I give some highlights. Because if you study Maqasid al-Shari'ah from the books of usul al-fiqh, ala Imam al-Ghazali or Imam al-Shatibi or Ibn Taymiyyah or all of the people who talked about Maqasid al-Shari'ah, you will find that they are theorizing for Maqasid al-Shari'ah for fiqh and for their place and time. And hifdul deen wal nafs wal aql wal mal wal irq. When you bring that and just juxtapose it to the current reality of policy and health and environment and economics and arts, many of these would not fit because they lack many concepts and they lack a detailed view of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. So I prefer to call the traditional Maqasid Shari'ah as Maqasid al-Fiqh rather than Maqasid Shari'ah. Maqasid Shari'ah proper for me is to go back to the Quran and look for the Quranic concepts, al-Mafahim al-Quraniyah. You go back to the Quranic concepts and see how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala define life and death, how He subhanahu wa ta'ala defined the human, how He defined the good or the happiness or the richness, or how did He define the concepts that are the building blocks of the contemporary system. And that is how we can integrate an Aqli or Naqli from my perspective, is to go back to the Quran and do research. And this is not an easy or one man or one woman job. This is requires a whole community of researchers in which the Quranic concepts are examined and analyzed and are taken to critique the current systems that we have in order to develop them and renew them. كي لا يكون دولة بين الأغنياء منكم. For example, the concept of dula, the concept of the circulation of wealth only between the rich. This is the Quranic concept. How can this concept enlighten our economic systems so that the system is not made to only circulate the money in the top 1%, as everybody is complaining these days. There's a top 1%, 5, 10% depending, and these are the people who circulate the money. Everybody else is working for them. In America, in Africa, in Asia, everybody is talking about that. How can we take that Quranic concept of كَيْ لَا يَكُونَ دُولَةً بَيْنَ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ مِنْكُمْ and take it and realize it in an economic system? Realize it in a way that achieves justice and achieves tadawul, the circulation. This is one of the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we look at the Quran with maqasidi eyes, with the eyes that look for the purpose and the philosophy and the principles and the virtues and so forth and the concepts, and these concepts are maqsooda. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had meant and intended for us to understand the world this way and understand justice this way and understand al-khayr or the good this way and understand happiness this way. And we take the Quranic concepts and we try to bring them back to our Aqli and Naqli heritage. The Naqli in the sense of the understanding and the fiqh and the tarikh and all of that, and al-Aqli in terms of sciences, to all the human experience, whether it is script-based or rationality-based. We bring that and we bring the Quranic concepts and we try to integrate and imagine new systems and new solutions and new ways to do business in different realms of life. That's what I think would take us a step ahead in Islamic research. It is not the school that historicizes al-wahy, that is not Islamic, and it's not the school that rejects al-aql and rejects science, that is also not Islamic. And I have critique to the schools that are trying to integrate the Western sciences as they are and the Islamic sciences in terms of fiqh only. I have this problem with the integration of these, and I have an issue with considering al-ala or the machine to be value-free and just take the technology and import the technology. That is also another failed solution. And this solution in which we take maqasid, a maqasidi approach, if you wish, to the Quran, I think is the way ahead in terms of Islamic thought, in terms of the integration of an Aqli or Naqli. I hope I covered the points I wanted to cover in this time. And again, thank you for inviting us and this warm welcome. Jazakumullah khair, barakallahu feekum. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this, inshallah, relationship between us, this great and prominent university, really, with not just a magnificent campus, but magnificent people, mashallah, to make this relationship, inshallah, a fruitful one and a step ahead, inshallah. Wa jazakumullah khair, wa assalamu alaikum.
Now we go straight forward to question and answer session. And for this session, we'd like to ask for the attendees to use the microphone in front of you and state your name and title and organization you are presenting, if any. And we open to the floor for any question. We pointed to the organizers around us so we can have discussion.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I just want to start thoroughly. My name is Hassan Basri. graduated from Kuwait University and also from Scotland. Integrated between Naqli and Aqli. I have experience working in Cairo as well, Cairo University, mashallah. Alhamdulillah. I just want to clarify further when you mentioned about Maqasid Shari'ah, from your perspective, is Maqasid al-Quraniyah. I think this is very interesting point, but you haven't elaborated this point. What we currently practice in, as you said just now, when you said well, Naqli is understanding of fiqh, and when you mentioned well, Aqli is look like natural sciences, I think I would expect it is very true. And even I think Naqli, when they mentioned about index Shari'ah, they call it the Shari'ah indexes, they focus on the 5 methods, which are, as you mentioned just now, is only on fiqh, and they exclude all other things, our shakhsiyat, akhlaq and so on, where people like us, for example, I'm in education, we are not involved, totally not involved in the building of Maqasid Shari'ah. I totally agree with you, but how to overcome this problem is number one, because this is what people understand, the Maqasid Shari'ah. It's like what they understand the fiqh. And further, if you can elaborate further, what are the principles or underlying point, if you can say, the al-mafahim al-Quraniyah? Do you have any, for example, numbers or principles so that we can go inside and then search further for this?
I feel guilty about being a member of the Shari'ah Index in one of its early forms, back here in Malaysia in 2007, 2008. And yes, around the table we were all people who deal with fiqh. We did not have, at that time, I was not one of the designers, I was just one of the experts who were called during the time of Tuna Abdullah Badawi to think about Maqasid Shari'ah. Came to Malaysia 5 or 6 times at that time to develop the initial proposal anyway at that time. Yes, you're right that the designers of the project of the time did not take the consideration of the other Islamic disciplines. People around the table were all fuqaha, and that's why 10 years later now I personally critique the same project that I was part of. لا بأس إن شاء الله يعني we all learn and there is no human fiqh or experience or book that is complete, and if you think that you produce something complete, then you have a problem with your niyyah perhaps. No, subhanAllah. So, but you are right, Islamic education, especially the educational side of any Islamic project, is very important, because the Islamic project, even if it's just a purely economic project, you need an educational arm to it in order to educate the public how to implement this new way and deal with this new institution and so forth. And it's very important to include different sides. How? The honest answer is that I don't know. I am still working on it. This is the research I've been involved in for the past, let's say, 2 years, in which I am trying to, this is like my own personal research as a talib ilm, as a researcher. I am trying to revisit the Quran, looking for the concepts and looking for a hierarchy of maqasid in order for us to imagine a manhajiyya, a methodology of how we can approach that. My findings so far is that the Quranic logic is a maqasid logic to start with. There is nothing in the Quran that is not justified by a illah or by a hikmah or by something. لكي لا لألا لعلكم لعل كذا. Everything in the Quran has to do with a purpose in the future that you're trying to achieve. And these purposes, as a researcher, I'm analyzing them, but I didn't write, I'm in the process, inshallah, of writing something that is concrete and justified. How? We need a committee in order to pedagogically imagine how we can train a researcher to do that. Because individual researchers, what they do, they read the Quran and they are experts in their sciences, and they try to bring Quranic concepts that help answer some basic questions, and they do that in an iterative way. I have students, I have the latest of my PhD students in Indonesia. He was trying to look at development from a Maqasid perspective. So what he did, he read the Quran many times, around in the Quran to look for what is related to al-bi'ah, the environment. And another round to look for what is related to at-tanmiyah or numu, the growth, and whether it's a Quranic concept or not, and so forth. He concluded, for example, from his going back and forth between the Quran and his economic research, he concluded, for example, that growth is not a Quranic objective. That in the Quran we don't have to grow the economy. We have to give people a good life, but not necessarily grow. And that bigger is not necessarily better from a Quranic perspective. And that al-bi'ah, for example, another of his conclusions, that al-bi'ah or the environment is something that is not supposed to be separate from the humans. We are part of the environment, and we should respect the animals and the plants because they are alive and they do tasbih and this and that. So he looks at the environment in a very lively way, and so forth. And he wrote some good theses. Alhamdulillah, he passed. Now he teaches in Indonesia. So my point is that this is a process that will require committees to work on and will require researchers to work on. This is high-level research. But I suggest for my brothers and sisters, for the graduate students or professors, to really give more consideration to the Quran. And because you will not find, like seriously, in Ibn Taymiyyah or Nawardi or Ghayathi and Juwayni, you will not find political theory that you are looking for. You're not going to find answers for the questions of the political theory of today. And you are not going to find them either in your American textbooks. And therefore, you will need to revisit the Quran. The Quran has a lot to do with politics. For example, if you're going to be a political science researcher, if you are a management person, al-fiqh al-idari, as developed in our history, is not going to answer your questions. What's called the fiqh al-idari, there's a number of books and so forth. That is not enough. And the typical management textbook is also not enough. So an advice for myself and you, to go back to the Quran and really try to work on that. But inshallah, pray for me, inshallah, I'm trying on this. Inshallah.
I'm Fadila, I'm Faculty of Shari'ah now. I have a question. Thank you very much for the speeches now. I learned a lot of things, especially on how to see Aqli and Naqli. I have a question as well on Aqli and Naqli on the basic core. When we see knowledge, when we see Naqli Aqli, is it knowledge by itself, or can we label them as methodology of knowledge? So what is it actually? Aqli Naqli, is it a methodology? Aqli as a methodology and Naqli as a methodology, or are both of them knowledge by themselves? And number two is, I don't know whether that question was material, but to me, when we start to write things about Aqli and Naqli, when we try to explain to the world, we have to really choose the words that we choose to write. And coming to choosing the words, it is very essential. When we write something, we say an Islamic approach, or we say the viewpoint of Islam. Is it also something that you call this now as an apologetic approach? Because we normally say that because we are in the middle of an establishment, things are already there. Now we want to see what Islam says about it. So I'm wondering about the right approach to say, do we use the word to revisit the Islamic contents or the Quranic contents, or to revive the Quranic values in certain matters? I think those two are basically my concerns. How do we approach as a scholar to see the current establishment, and how do we reflect that to Islamic views? And when we said just now about Naql, we have to interpret it, the use of faculty of mind. then to me, my point of view, that is already an exercise of Aqli. So, as you said just now, there's no demarcation, it's not fixed demarcation between Naqli and Aqli. I don't know, this you perhaps could give your observation.
I do agree with you. I totally agree that that's Naqli, as Imam Ali said, this book between two covers doesn't speak. إنما يقرأه الرجال. It's people who read the book. The book doesn't speak. So once you read the book, there is Aqli involved. Like, there is no pure Naqli. That is, of course, the Wahi is the pure Naqli to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But when we read that Wahi, we use our mind. How do we understand the words and what do they mean? This is an Aqli exercise. Aqli and Naqli for me are not methodologies. To me, I don't divide Al-Aqli or Naqli like that. I think the source of knowledge is Al-Wahi. And I think that our knowledge that we develop by dealing with the reality, the experimental knowledge, is just our best shot at interpreting what's happening. But there's no certainty in it. The only certainty to me is Al-Quran. And Al-Quran is teaching us what the world is and what we should do in it. I don't think that the universe is a different book. The universe is the same book that the Quran is telling us to read. It's not, you see, we don't have two different sources of knowledge. The source of knowledge is the Quran, period. And even when I look at the universe, I'm looking at the universe because the Quran is asking me to look at the universe. Siru fil ardi fanzuru. Not that the universe without the Quran is going to give me a source of knowledge that I can integrate. And that guards me from the whims of the sciences, of the pure sciences of the universe, where people go to the universe with nothing but their faculty of mind. And that, yes, could reach the truth in many ways, but they are in need of the revelation or guidance. So it's somewhere between, if you wish, the Mu'tazila and the Shari'ah here. It's not the Mu'tazili way of tahsin al-aqli, in the sense that al-aql could actually reach every virtue and every rule. No, that is too extreme. Yes, al-aql could explore, but al-aql needs wahi. And in Ash'ari, when Imam al-Ghazali said that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that killing is good or adultery is good, then it is good. No, it's not like that either. It's not, it's our understanding of al-wahi also has an aqli process in order for us to understand. And our fitrah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us in the Quran, knows our fitrah is pure. We are not created evil, or we are created pure. So we can sense that killing somebody is wrong. فَطَوَعَتْ لَهُ نَفْسُهُ قَتْلَ أَخِيهِ. The first two people, he killed his brother against not the revelation, against his own fitrah, and so forth. So to answer your question about the Islamic approach, yes, I think many of the things we label Islamic are apologetic in that sense. So the Islamic, the Islamic food and the Islamic tourism and the Islamic and all of that. I was joking in the other lecture with some of the youth. I was telling them I was in Thailand and I was invited to an Islamic movie. And they told me, I told them, why do you call the movie Islamic? They said because it doesn't have any women, so it doesn't have any music, and doesn't. So they listed a number of approaches that they think are Islamic, and it's like an Islamic party that is Machiavellian and opportunistic and everything, but it's called itself an Islamic party. But it's not taking anything Islamic. It's just doing politics as usual. Or an Islamic slaughterhouse. I went to one of them in Canada, and I had an issue with just being a normal slaughterhouse where the poor chicken are slaughtered and so on. The only difference is that somebody is standing, they say Bismillah, 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 as the chicken are slaughtered. But it's the same feeding and the same the chickens, and the same, there is nothing Islamic about this, in treating those animals and so forth, except for the guy who says Bismillah. And when the guy is not there, they put a computer on that says, Bismillah, 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 from a computer. And I told the brothers I cannot be in this halal committee. They invited me to join the halal committee. And they're in Toronto. I told the brothers I can't be a part of this halal committee because the computer sound that says Bismillah doesn't make the chicken halal. That's not, we might as well say Bismillah and eat from the Nasara khalas. Why do we have to? And these are examples, funny examples of Islamism that we do sometimes in a very apologetic way. Is there any Islamic approach? Yes, but I believe the Islamic approach is the Quranic approach, is something that, without necessarily calling it Islamic, we don't have to call it the Islamic State for the state to be Islamic or compliant with Islam. We don't have to call the company an Islamic company. But we have to carry the ethics and the philosophy and the concepts from Quran in order to call it Islamic. Allah Khair.
Assalamu alaikum. Dr. Yasir, Jazakumullah khairan. Mahmoud from FSU, UC. What the difference between Islamization of knowledge and integration of knowledge by Naqli and Aqli? أيضا ما هي قراءتك المستقبلية لنجاح هذه المنتجات أو الأفكار الجميلة إن شاء الله. جزاك الله خير.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether the Islamization of knowledge, did you apply it here? Did you have seminars about it? In the integration of Aqli or not? Yeah, I'm sure. It's a project. It's a project in motion anyway. It's been always critiqued and so forth. I do visit IIIT, the International Institute of Islamic Thought, giving lectures there and so on every now and then in Washington. And the latest I hear from the owners of that project is that they, after a number of critiques, they are calling it the reform of Islamic thought, not the Islamization of knowledge. And the reform of Islamic thought now has a number of sub-projects. Maqasid Shari'ah would be one of them. They're publishing a number of books on that. So I'm not sure where the Islamization of knowledge project in Malaysia is going. I heard about it from our Asatida, Rahimahullah Sheikh Taha. Was one of our ustads. He told me about the experiment in here with IUM. But I'm not updated on where the project is in terms of Islamization of knowledge. I'm aware though that some of the strongest critiques came out of Malaysia. The critique of Professor Al-Attas, I read, of Dr. Farouqi's, and both are great giants of our Islamic thought contemporary. And we are all students, myself included, of them, but the critique of Al-Attas to Farouqi's proposal, I think, was very strong and very relevant, especially Professor Al-Attas's critique of Dr. Farouqi, assuming that the sciences, in the Western sense, have kind of a neutral kind of philosophy. And his critique, the height of it was that no, the Western science. Why do you divide to start with Western sciences into psychology and education? And that is a very radical critique. From my readings of Professor Attas, I didn't see him giving an alternative. So I agree that maybe we should not divide into politics and economics and psychology, but do we have an alternative? Until we have an alternative, this is what we have. So we have to go by the sciences that we have until we can offer perhaps different alternatives. Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum. Right, when you talk about Islamic Renaissance, Islamic resurgence, Islamic revivals, Islamic awakening, so many names. So actually one of the most important factors or problems is a crisis of methodology, crisis of knowledge, or crisis of mind. So there are many attempts with the latest attempt, Tawhidic paradigm. They want to bring God in knowledge. So Islamization, now Islamicization, then there will be a de-Westernization of knowledge. There will be harmonization of knowledge. And then we come with integration of Aqli and Naqli. So my question is, what will be the future of this approach, particularly the integration of Aqli and Naqli? And what is your opinion on the conceptual framework of Islamic science?
A big question. So to analyze this, the de-Westernization, I don't believe in the de-Westernization because I do this research in the West. I've been living in the West for a long time. I think this is also Western. If you want to take this Western, the West versus the East is a geography, and so many Muslims in the West are contributing to Islamic knowledge in a major way these days. And many of you here, mashallah, trained in the West, and you are here doing your work for Islamic knowledge. Tawhidi paradigm, I agree. I think that we need to take the Tawhidi paradigm forward, but Tawhidi paradigm is for the paradigm to be based on Tawhidullah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not necessarily of the integration of the different approaches. Some of them are un-Islamic, or some of them are non-Quranic. They come from a different perspective. But Tawhidi in the sense of the integration of the different sides of the Islamic approach. One of the good introductions to that was the Tafsir al-Tawhidi by Sheikh Turabi, rahimahullah, one of our ustads as well, rahimahullah. And Sheikh al-Turabi, it's unfortunate that he was too busy with politics and did not continue what he started in the Tafsir al-Tawhidi. If you read the introduction, he is talking about taking a Tawhidi approach based on the Quran in order to integrate the understanding of the Quran itself as well as the understanding of knowledge. But unfortunately, he left it at the introduction level. I hope, inshallah, we don't do that. So basically, the Tawheed.
And even to the extent, I can say, even some Arab countries, they also put themselves or fall themselves in the secular understanding. For example, if you go to Islamic University of Medina, they only teach Sulti, Shari'ah, Dawah, and Quran, without having any other faculty. Now they start to have it, as we can say, as integration of Naqli, if you can put in that terminology. But and also the same happened to Islamic University in Pakistan. But Alhamdulillah, Malaysia, they understand, I think, in a broader term, where they put, for example, Islamic University of Malaysia, international university, where they put faculty of law, faculty of Islamic banking, faculty of ulum nahwi, ulum or labor knowledge. Where this faculty, they try to, as you said, like Islamization of knowledge. And I am amused of the definition made by one professor in Malaysia, Professor Mbaka, when he said, well, what we mean by Islamization of knowledge is not to Islamize knowledge from the Western part, for example, but the way we understand the knowledge, for example, the methodology, the goal of learning the knowledge, for example, we have a goal. So I think he mentioned about 5, I can't remember all the three, but I mentioned goal and objective. So he mentioned it's very clear. To me, it is a very good explanation of explanation of knowledge. We don't say which way, where some people misquote and say when we Islamize knowledge, we make a sign become Islamic, for example, where the sign before that is kafir, for example, or not believing, something like that. That's actually wrong understanding. But what Professor Osman Bakar mentioned is quite clear. And therefore, to me, to people here, when we mention integration of ulum naqliyah wa naqliyah, it is not a perfect or permanent approach. It is temporary. When people understand, inshallah, we go back to the original teaching. It's like what Ibn Abbas says, he learned Al-Quran, that as you mentioned just now, that the research that we are doing, but we have to move toward that point. Otherwise, people will remain why you want this? Because I'm already here and something like that. They say, this is the house. I think just to share our dilemma.
I totally agree with you. And I think that part of the colonization of the Muslim Ummah is this problem. Part of the colonization is that we define Islam as ibadat. And when you go to an Islamic university, you study fiqh, but mostly fiqh al-ibadat. And when you study mu'amalat, you study history, you study issues that in the past. And you study other things, and you study Islam in a very, if you wish, Christian way. Like it's the Islam of the church only, not outside the church. Cairo University, you study Islam in the faculty of Shari'ah, but in any other faculty, political science, economics, these are just simple American and British textbooks. Some of them translated, some of them even in English. And yes, there are some professors who are trying to bring an Islamic approach to politics and so on. But the environment is too tough on them. They don't have much chance. Faculty of language, a number of them are trying to bring an Islamic approach. Al-Azhar tried to bring the Islamic side by making kulliyat amaliyah, practical colleges, طب والحقوق and so forth. But now, if you look at the curriculum in Al-Azhar, you will find that it's also just simple. It used to be even American textbooks and British textbooks, but now it's just a professor who is always also trained in America or the UK. They write some malzama, and the students just read the malzama, but there is no philosophy in the practical colleges of Al-Azhar. And they're not really Islamic. Well, yeah, they require the student to memorize 5 ajda, 5 juz of the Quran, and to memorize, and they have the imtihan in hadith. So yes, I can memorize 5 juz and have the imtihan in the hadith and whatever, but that doesn't make me an economist from an Islamic point of view, or a lawyer from an Islamic point of view. And therefore, people who are graduates of Al-Azhar, some of them are my friends from these practical colleges, are very secular. Some of them are atheists. I know one of them is an atheist guy, and he's an engineer. I graduated from Al-Azhar, and call him Sheikh and everything. So that is a schism. And when you go to Kulliyat Shari'ah, you will find them living in a different century. They don't live in our century. They don't even have a fiqh al-muhasib. I supervise some of our students. They have a hard time to register a point of research on the fiqh al-muhasib. We don't want muhasib, we don't want minorities, we don't want any of that. It's just fiqh al-qadim. Bring a makhtuta, a manuscript, and tahrir al-makhtuta. Or you compare Ibn Taymiyyah and Izz al-Salam. But to deal with fiqh al-muhasib, the professors reject the points. They don't want fiqh al-muhasib and so forth. And let alone the faculty of Shari'ah, when you propose that the student writes on the real issues, the political and the economic issues. They are not, you don't want to be political, even if you don't have any political intention, you're just wanting the student to deal with the realities. The fiqh of, one of my students, he went back to Al-Azhar, he wanted to defend the thesis on fiqh al-ihtijajat al-madaniyah, the fiqh of the civil unrest. And so there was a lot of this in the Arab world. What is the fiqh of that? Is it haram? Is it halal? What are the ahkam? And that is a very relevant topic. There are ahkam fiqhiyah, has to do with people going out in the streets, and some of them lose their lives, and some of them, is this right, is this? And of course they told him, no, this is siyasa. You go to kulliyat siyasa. And so I agree that, and I think that Malaysia is one of the reasons, and I do give a portion as much as I can of my time, because I feel that here there is the potential of that new Islamic knowledge, that people don't have an issue. Here I've got to know some of you in my last visit. MashaAllah, people are professionals in different sciences and so on, yet the university is about the integration of Aqli and Naqli. This is new. This is not, otherwise you have the professionals and you have the mashayikh. The mashayikh are not professionals, the professionals are not mashayikh. Here, mashallah, all of you are mashayikh.
And we do know that it's non-Quranic, it's not originated from Quran, and it's generated outside from the Quran, and it's maybe a Western development. So very much would like to hear your thoughts on the neutrality of system approach and how it is different with other ideologies. Thank you very much.
Jazakallah khair, akhi. Barakallahu feekum for participating in this IIS. The systems approach is not a neutral approach. I wrote that book 12 years ago now, 11 years ago, and therefore the way I look at it now is I look back in the Quran trying to find elements of that systems approach. I'm questioning the systems approach in terms of the Quran, and I'm rejecting the elements of that approach that I don't find a proof from the Quran for. So, for example, one of the things I proposed in that book is the integration of the parts, or the holism. It's called the holism in systems. I found in the Quran, but which is not something I mentioned in that book, this is my new research, that the Quran is warning us against dividing it into partitions or fragments or shreds. الذين كما أنزلنا على المقتسمين الذين جعلوا القرآن عضين. عضين means أعضاء, means something that you divide the Quran into shreds. Even in the translations in English, they tell you those who divide the Quran into fragments. The Quran is warning us against this fragmentation. أتؤمنون ببعض الكتاب وتكفرون ببعض. Do you believe in some and you reject some? No. So when we talked about integration of the Quranic verses and the Quranic surahs, the Quran itself is warning us against the partitioning. So I agree to that. When in the systems approach, I talked about purposefulness as the basis of logic and this kind of thing. And I revisited the Quran, I looked for purposes, I found that the Quranic logic is a purposeful logic. So there are some elements in the systems approach that are neutral in the sense of being ideas of the mind that you can find confirmation from the Quran for. It reminds me of Imam al-Ghazali, again with the organon, when he looked back in the Quran to look for justifications for some of the syllogism of Aristotle in the Quran. And so he kind of agreed to the philosophy before he goes to the Quran. Perhaps this is a process that I'm going through. But I think that systems philosophy is important because it is beyond postmodernism. It's not a modernist philosophy, and it's not a postmodernist philosophy. And I think that it's important in order for us on the philosophical level to go beyond the modernist and the postmodernist approaches. It's inevitable that you have a philosophy when you approach the Quran. And the Quran doesn't have a surah on philosophy. Like there is no, you cannot really read a philosophical system from the Quran. You come with a certain logic or a certain philosophy. Is it neutral? I'm hoping that through the examining of the elements of a systems approach on the Quran, that I neutralize it more in my research, because some of it might not be as neutral. But I'm looking for an abstract approach rather than something that is in the science background, as you mentioned, and I'm imposing it in a way that might not be accurate. So I hope this answers your question.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So my name is Muhammad Aqli bin Abdul Tariq. So I'm from MST and I'm president of Student Representative Council in this university. So just a simple question to you. What is your advice for students, which is us, to move this integration agenda, integration of Aqli and Naqli in broader field dakwah, national building, and the most important, I think, for the youth movement and development. So thank you.
Sure. Well, the advice for the students to learn and read and to be as knowledgeable as you can about this. If you are talking about da'wah and movements and so on, I would advise you to read the different approaches to public communication and public activism, not just in the West and the East. Like read from different sources that deal with the issues that you are dealing with. But also an advice for the students to understand the Quran, not just to memorize it, not to be a hafiz, but to be a fahim. A fahim is more important than hafiz. And to really work on your Arabic. If you, inshallah, you're a brilliant student, work on your Arabic. When I went to Canada, I didn't speak any English. Now I lecture in English. You can learn the language, and Arabic is very systematic, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it easy. So work on your Arabic if you can. Otherwise, give time to the Quran in the translations that you understand, in order for you to look for the Quranic concepts, as I'm saying, and the Quranic structures, and the Quranic. Have this relation with the Quran. That is very important. We left the Quran for scholars of Shari'ah particularly, and of fiqh even particularly. And in the matters of da'wah, you mentioned nation building, and youth movements and communication, we don't read the Quran. We think that the Quran is for the scholars. So I advise that you, inshallah, strengthen your relationship with that book. How can we use the integration of Aqli or Naqli? That would require research. That to move from the level of research to the level of activism that you talk about is something I don't have answers for. I don't know how we can move the philosophy of the integration of Al-Aqli or Naqli into the active world. Because when I was your age and I was an active student, for Islam and Da'wah, and we go there and do these Da'wah things, that is very practical. We really need guidance from people who could bridge the gap between the philosophy and the ideas and what we do. That is, business as usual, activism. You go and tell the students, to organize for events and this kind of thing. So I'm not sure how the integration, perhaps this could be an area of research about the integration of Al-Aqli and Naqli into your work as youth movement. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khairan kathira, Professor Shari'ah, for